Welcome to One Health Wednesdays. This podcast aims to promote the principles of One Health and encourage professional development. Here's your host, Ginger Dixon.
Welcome to One Health Wednesdays. Today we'll be continuing our discussion with Dr. Ginger Dixon. We'll be talking about her doctorate and her capstone project, and we'll continue the discussion about surveillance and the application of this project. For now, we'll have a quick message from our sponsors. See you soon.
Attention One Health Wednesdays listeners. Are you ready to transform One Health education and create lasting change? Meet GBL4, the leaders in game-based learning for real-world behavior change. Our immersive, interactive tools bring complex topics like zoonotic diseases and public health to life, bridging the gap between understanding and action. With GBL4, you're not just educating, you're empowering solutions. Join us in redefining interdisciplinary health education. Visit gbl4.org to see how you can partner with us to build a healthier, more informed world.
Welcome back to One Health Wednesdays podcast. After a brief hiatus, we're excited to have your host, Dr. Ginger Dixon, returning to the mic. Dr. Dixon, a public health expert, epidemiologist, and the founder of One Life Epi Solutions, is also the creator of One Health Kids, the platform that champions the interconnectedness of human, animal, and environmental health. I will be your guest host today, and it is with great pleasure to welcome back our Dr. Ginger Dixon. In this new episode, Dr. Dixon will focus on her groundbreaking PhD capstone project, which explored how citizen science can enhance environmental, ecological, and human surveillance systems. The first episodes will dive deep into this research, addressing the questions on how can citizen science be applied to develop a more robust surveillance system for environmental, ecological, and human factors. If you're passionate about public health and environmental science, or the role of everyday people in shaping better systems for global health, this season will offer valuable insights and thought-provoking discussions. So join every Wednesday as we explore the future of surveillance, data collection, and the power of collective action. That's amazing, and must be really exciting to have a bigger family and also get your doctorate degree as well. So you have to also tell us about your doctoral capstone and which is the sort of dissertation and what's the differences between a capstone and a dissertation, because I have no idea, for example, in this.
Yeah. So my degree is a doctor of public health, which is it's a bit different from a philosophy doctorate, where the philosophy doctorate's PhD is very focused on, research, and oftentimes folks will spend several years on, their dissertation project. The doctorate of public health is a little bit more of an applied practice type of degree, where it really integrated in leadership and management. My concentration is in population health analytics and decision making. So with that, there was a lot of informatics and modeling and data analysis. And then we had an applied practice experience. And then we also had our capstone project, which is kind of like a mini dissertation. I guess it's a bit more of like a balanced, type of thing between the application and in the theory. And so the project that I developed was integrating citizen science, surveillance, and One Health to create a surveillance system. And I wanted to make sure that it met certain criteria, that it integrated in, the environmental health component, the animal health, and then human health, or in this case, human disease surveillance as well. And I wanted to make sure that it would be either free or very low cost, and then, could be scaled for organizations that had more resources, because we see that, there's a need for this type of One Health surveillance across the globe. In some communities and areas don't have the resources to spend, thousands and thousands on these very robust surveillance systems and the technology that's often used to create them. And so I wanted to find something that was both resourceful and practical, but also met those needs. And I felt like citizen science was a great tool to use to develop that.
Wow, that's really exciting. It has a lot of the One Healthness enveloped in your project. I can really feel that. And would you maybe be able to explain what citizen science is exactly? Because we kind of get a feel for what it is, but I'm very curious how it helped you in this project.
Yeah, and it's a great question. I appreciate you bringing that up. So citizen science it's a method where you are training oftentimes volunteers or students, everyday people out in the community to collect data. So it's really great for collecting large amounts of data. And it's everyday people, so it's data that is easily collected or understood, and then you provide some training on what to look for and how to describe or categorize things, and then where to submit that data. And usually, an organization or a group, will collect that information, bring it in and analyze it and use it for scientific purposes. It's used a lot in ecology. So there's a few groups that let's see, like the Ocean Research and Conservation Association, or ORCA. They've used citizen science to monitor toxins and toxicants in fish in the Indian River Lagoon. And then I believe the University of Nebraska-Lincoln also does citizen science projects. Well, they'll do collect, tick photos of, ticks and other arthropods, and then they'll do bioblitzes to understand, the different species in an area and the diversity of animal or insect species in an area.
I always say that I think in One Health, we always tend to forget the environmental science part, and we tend to really focus on the animal and the human or the public health side. So your application of citizen science to One Health sounds like it's really on point, and I think it's something that we lack a lot in the One Health aspect. So what are the next steps, I think, for this?
Yeah, so I, along with the project, I created a strategic plan that could kind of provide some guidance for organizations, or professionals wanting to develop a surveillance system like this, and an example, a dashboard based on Arizona. And really, I think that there are some different applications for it, in One Health, and then specifically for looking at biodiversity hotspots, keystone species, which are species that contribute significantly to the stability or the maintenance of, ecosystems. And as you touched on, and thank you again for bringing that up, that includes the environment. There are plants and trees, and as well as insects and animals. So they maintain that balance. And then also to look at, in one place, those trends in the environment and the climate, in species and disease cases, to see those all in one place and get a little bit better of an idea of how those changes are coinciding with each other and how they're affecting each other. So for the next steps, I think this surveillance can be applied to look at hotspots in biodiversity and prioritize those for conservation. It can help to connect, again, those impacts of changing climate, environmental events like land development or natural disasters, and understand how those affect the keystone species abundance, and then the distribution of zoonotic diseases or keystone species, within an area. And then it also, some of the visuals and analyses help to prioritize which species to monitor based on the zoonotic disease trends. And then to utilize, kind of all three, that bridge of human resources, like our citizen scientists out there, they've been deputized to do this work. And then ecology and public health, create this system that can be used by communities. So we offer this as a service, to come in and create this One Health surveillance system at One Life Epi Solutions. And then we also can, educate and train others on how to create the system for themselves. If that's something that they would like to take and bring to their communities and their public health practice. And there's definitely a lot to be improved on. I mean, there are points where the dashboard itself can be improved. The way that keystone species were identified, can definitely be narrowed, as well as the specificity of the diseases that have to do with zoonotic diseases. So those host or vector species can definitely be made more specific. So, I know you're a veterinary doctor, so you could absolutely empathize with this. When I was building the dashboard, I a lot of literature will cite that birds are one of the primary hosts for West Nile virus. So in the dashboard, for West Nile virus, it's kind of looking at all of Avis, so all birds.
Wow.
But there are certain birds that are more likely to carry West Nile virus, or be susceptible to that. And there are so many birds out there. I didn't realize how many species or genus of birds there were until I started doing this work. And so, there's definitely room for improvement with things like that to make that more specific and narrow, and then just adapting it to each area. I looked at Arizona just because those are resources that I knew where to look for those data, and was well aware of the data resources on the public health side that were already available. But there's a lot of differences between areas in the keystone species, or what priorities communities might have that they want to look at. So it can definitely be adapted for different areas, and we can narrow down birds a bit.
Are there any more lessons learned that you'd like to share apart from the issues with the tableau and maybe understanding or like realizing the crazy amount of bird species that exist for it?
Yeah. It was a very eye-opening project, and thank you for your kind words, by the way. Yeah, so some of the lessons learned were definitely technical. I used Tableau Public, which is a free data visualization tool. Just because, again, it's free, it's accessible. But I learned I used a workaround to kind of work around the limits on file sizes. data file sizes that can be imported into Tableau Public. But I learned that despite my workaround that I thought was so smart, Tableau actually erases the original data file if it's over a certain size.
Oh
And so then
no.
I was like, I think once or twice I had to go back and redo the whole thing, which, the silver lining is I got really good at putting it back together. But it was not fun, when trying to complete your doctoral project. And I think I have a few more gray hairs because of it. But
Comes with the doctoral project, it is
yeah.
always something.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't escape without a few gray hairs, right? And then I think you touched on a really great point about how, yes, we definitely want to bring in other expertise on a project and surveillance systems like these. I love that you brought about the migration patterns for birds. That's a fantastic point. And then definitely bringing in, ecologists and veterinarians, like yourself and other experts in One Health. It's great to have that additional insight. And that's really the spirit of One Health, right? We're wanting to break down those silos and get more people's input so that we're not operating in a vacuum and maybe missing some really important points that we should be integrating. And then I think, even bringing in experts on land development and emergency preparedness to really understand some of the impacts of human influences on the land, and then what types of impacts natural disasters might have both on human activities and animal and plant health. That could also improve the data. There's some really cool tools out there with AI that are coming in and being integrated really rapidly. It's been mind-blowing what all AI can do these days, and I think we can definitely integrate that for our benefit, in One Health. And then I think my biggest takeaway in this project is just that, One Health surveillance is a lot more accessible than we might think it is, especially leveraging, our communities, our people, our citizen scientists, and the data that, people are already putting together. It's just a matter of knowing who's collecting what and putting it all together. I'm just one person and put together a little mini surveillance system. And so I think it's absolutely attainable for communities far and wide as well.
So biodiversity is quite an important point in your project. So how do you think your project could help biodiversity in the sense of monitoring specifically here?
Thank you. Yeah, and I appreciate you bringing that up because I know, I come from an epi background where we're often very focused on the infectious disease side or the case side. And part of our goal in One Health is to really get to the prevention side of that, right? We want to prevent those things ever getting to human cases. So biodiversity, when we're looking at the biological diversity of species in an area, we can look at it at either the micro level or the macro level, looking at the larger ecosystems, because we really want to make sure that that balance of ecosystems is kept in check. And then that is preventing those spillover events, because as those ecosystems get out of balance, then those opportunistic or invasive species will sometimes come in, and those tend to be those really weedy species that can come in and have a big role in the transmission of infectious diseases, those zoonotic diseases, and then that can increase the risk of spillover events. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And I could talk a little bit more about how we measured biodiversity in the dashboard.
That would be really interesting if you could go into that.
Yeah, thank you. So I learned through this project that You can measure it either as there's kind of the base, the number of species that are present, and that's the total species richness is how it's termed. And then there's also a number of other metrics that you can look at, like simple species richness, the diversity of the vegetation that's in the area. Um, as that serves for food and habitat and nourishment and all the good things that the environment and the animals in it need. And then you can also look at just the richness, so how many of the broad taxonomic groups are. So, how many different genera are there, that type of thing. And then I did look at, there are certain metrics that have been prioritized by the U.S. Department of Agricultural and Natural Resources Conservation Service. So they really prioritize keystone species richness, which is what was looked at in the surveillance system that developed. And then they also prioritize other things like ecosystem diversity, and then the number and abundance of vulnerable species, and then just the total species as well. So there's a lot of different ways to measure it. And I think, it definitely be interesting to integrate some of the more complex metrics of biodiversity into a surveillance system like this.
No, that's really interesting. So then you created a heat map, right? And how did you use the literature to create this, and why do you think it was important for your project?
So yeah, thank you. The heat map, like I said, that's I think one of my favorite visuals, just because I think geospatial analyses are fun as an epi. That's the data nerd side of me. So yes, the heat map, as you said, looks at the keystone species richness. What I did is I went through and identified those species that were classified as keystone species or ecosystem engineers in literature, and looked both at the ones that had mentioned specifically in the area, and then since Arizona is in the southwest part of the United States, also looking at those that were in the southwest, and then flagging those through coding as keystone species. So then when those observations were reported by a citizen scientist, they would be flagged and show up in that geospatial mapping. So it looks at single points, the latitude and longitude where they were observed. And then it also looks at the counts of unique keystone species by area. And within Arizona, I believe it's broken up by census tract. And that way it can be used to assess, land development decisions and ensure that the land near biodiversity hotspots will be protected, and make sure that ecosystem stability that we talked about will be protected and prevent the spillover events. It can also be used to look at changes over time, to see if that species richness is declining, and maybe that might indicate spillover events, or maybe the need for more research to figure out why it's declining. And again, it's not, we're looking at all of these as metrics to get an idea, but we can't really see if it's a for sure definite risk, but it's an indicator, so that we can target those areas to enhance the research and surveillance and see what's going on and see what interactions might increase the risk of transmission.
A little bit more. Yeah, and regarding, for example, the zoonotic disease side, I think we always tend to forget that there's about 75% of spillover diseases come from zoonotic diseases. So, what about zoonotic diseases? How can surveillance be used within the topic of zoonotic diseases? It's obviously one of the main pillars of One Health. So, well, I believe biodiversity should also be a pillar of One Health, but zoonotic diseases is the main topic that we always talk about in One Health. So, where do you think your surveillance dashboard, why is it important, and how can it be used in this regard?
Yeah, and you're right, definitely. We'd be like remiss to not talk about the zoonotic disease application for sure. And that's kind of, I think the zoonotic disease is what got me into epidemiology and public health, to begin with, and kind of sparked that interest. So it's fair. It's fair to spend some time on that as well. So this one, I think the biggest use for this particular way that the surveillance system was built out is that you can look at the, smaller areas of where those human zoonotic disease cases are popping up. And then you can also look at it in relation to the host and vector species that are relevant for that disease and see if there's an increase or a change in the number or range of those species, and if that might be contributing to the human cases. So a little bit on the back end about how this worked was, again, going back to literature, right, and really trying to make sure that the surveillance system was evidence-based. Went through and identified animal and insect species that are host infectors for zoonotic disease, and then again use coding and programming to associate those with the diseases that they might spread, and then flag those in the dashboard.
So are there plans for example, green spaces in areas in Arizona, or is it not something that you've looked into?
That is a great thing to incorporate, actually, and I love that. So I think one of the things that I've also been thinking about more lately is those strength-based metrics. And when we're talking about the environment, green spaces are an incredible strength-based metric intervention, I guess. They're really an intervention, but we can use them as a metric. So it's not incorporated into the surveillance system. And now that you mention it, I think that could definitely be a way to grow this as well and incorporate and improve it. In Arizona, yes, there definitely is a push to conserve green spaces, and I hope to, I think that surveillance systems and dashboards like these can provide great evidence to continue to incorporate those areas, as you can kind of line up, where those biodiversity hotspots are in relation to the green spaces. In Arizona, we have an especially rich indigenous culture. And what I learned through this research is that those areas that are protected by our indigenous members and tribal members are especially rich biodiversity hotspots because they've gone through such trouble to, protect the land and the plants and animals within it, and really honor them and maintain those ecosystems and work with the land and the species that are there. And so I think that would also provide some great evidence to continue to protect those areas as well. I think
So my next question is like, who can actually use this project? But you started.
Yeah. So, epidemiologist, but I'm biased. I think there's a lot of different professions, and not just in public health that can use it. So, public health, of course, right? We kind of talked about they can use surveillance like this to look at the trends over time and have, an early warning type of system to look at, when they might see increases for zoonotic disease transmission risk. And then we talked about researchers and how they can evaluate how climate and environment and animal species and human disease cases have changed together over time and how they might be influencing each other. And then I would really like to see for medical professionals, veterinarians such as yourself, to anticipate the types of disease cases that they might be seeing in an area based on the species that are present, and how those things are changing, historical cases. And then for ecologists and biologists, one, I would love, again, to integrate insight from all these different professions to enhance the surveillance and make it more specific, but also for them to take it and evaluate those biodiversity hotspots and those that are at risk for decreasing in biodiversity, and really support those ecosystems, and then also anticipate the risk for changes in biodiversity and ecosystem stability if there are natural disaster events or land development events in the area, and then just see how the changes in the climate and prevalence of other species that work together in an ecosystem might affect biodiversity, and then city planning and policy making to protect those areas that have a high biodiversity. So on the heat map, those areas that are going to show darker, those are high priority to protect from land development events and plan infrastructure that can mitigate the risk of spillover for communities that are nearby, for areas that are at a risk for decreasing biodiversity. So to help, protect the areas that are especially precious, and then protect the people in areas that are high risk for spillover.
So, and what other challenges did you have while building this project?
Yeah, the biggest one, I think, one is just something that, across epidemiology and data science, and right, we want to find data sources and connect them in a way that is meaningful and relatable and that can actually be translated. We never want to just gather data for the sake of hoarding it on a, yes, exactly. We want to gather data to tell a story and put it to use. So, I think that was definitely something for this project, because it's meant to be a proof of concept and illustrate what we can do. It was very broad. So it was kind of challenging to think about different ways that it could be used, but without getting too expansive. And then the volume of data was a lot. It was a lot. And one of the challenges of that is the file size. I use Tableau Public, which has an upload max of, I always get them mixed up, megabyte and gigabyte, but it was 1, and I want to shoot and say, yeah, thank you. Master of none. Yeah. Thank you for double checking me here. So, my husband would completely make fun of me right now. Yeah. So with that max file size, what I did for these larger data files is I split them up, right, using coding, and then I joined them together inside Tableau Public. Well, I thought that was a really cool fix. However, what happens with that is that Tableau Public, when the data size is over a certain limit, it will dump the file size for, efficiency and space saving and all that. It'll dump the file, the data file, so you can still work with the dashboard and the information, but the actual data source is gone. So if you want to go back and reconnect, your data sources, or do more data blends like the dashboard incorporates, you can't do that. You have to do it all over again. And so I think for smaller areas, Tableau Public is a great resource. The community it's really helpful to have, an IT specialist that kind of runs the data pipeline and makes sure that the dashboard, is running and doing what it should be. And then to have somebody that is sort of a dedicated program specialist who is, say if a jurisdiction has like one epi for the jurisdiction, they're busy with other things as well. And so, it would be good to have somebody who's just kind of running this program and really engaging with the stakeholders and making sure that the questions that they want to address and answer are being addressed and answered, and then that people are getting, support, especially if you're, integrating more citizen science data than just from iNaturalist, and you're asking citizen scientists to collect other information on, land development or natural disasters or, other things that you want to focus on in your data collection. It's really important to have a dedicated person to, train them and keep them engaged and make sure that it's really a quality project long term.
Okay.
But
That's
yeah,
the
I think it's
you
definitely
actually provide.
yes, absolutely. So this is where I come in and sit down with an organization or a community and see, what priorities do they have in their area that they want to address. Are there certain diseases that are really concerning, or are they wanting to make sure and maintain their biodiversity and their ecosystems to really sort of stay on the prevention side of One Health, right? Or are they very prone for natural disasters, and they're wanting to look and see how those natural disasters are affecting their species and their ecosystems, and things like that. And then we really go in and do that tailored deep dive, right, to talk with experts and look at literature and see what data sources are available in the area and learn about which animal species are important for their ecosystem stability and their host and vector species for a zoonotic disease. And then we build it, and we either add those data sources and build them in and build that pipeline, and then create this dashboard visualization system. And then we can also create those sort of custom citizen science type of programs where we're collecting, either if there's gaps in the data that are available in the area, or there's specific questions that we're really wanting to address, or specific populations that we want to bring in. Last time we talked about, our indigenous communities that really are gold, when it comes to helping to protect our biodiversity and our ecosystems and our environments. Do we want to bring them in so that they can contribute what they know, their ethno-ecologic knowledge.
How much was the tool that you used?
The tool I use is free, and that's why
that's why you're saying to use maybe a different tool, because it's not worth the data dumping all the time. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Like the extra gray hairs that I have from the data dumping, I don't think was worth it. The stress on my heart as you're trying to finish your capstone. For smaller areas, absolutely. Like for Malta, we were looking at, for the amount of observations, if you're dealing with file sizes that meet those upload limits, or you're only connecting a few sources, whereas I connected 5 or 6 different sources on the dashboard. I think it would be totally reasonable and feasible to continue to use Tableau Public, something like that.
Not enough.
And then just, yeah. I mean, I think it all just depends on the community and those needs. And the point was to use tools that were free, because I, more than anything, want to make sure that it was accessible for everyone. And then, just the coding on the back end. It was really, I used some technique called fuzzy logic and regular expressions, where you're matching the different, you can match either on a specific species or on an entire genera. And then had to get really creative with ways to flag certain animal species based on the host or vector, based on the disease that they might be a host or vector for. So that, definitely took some creative coding, because for some diseases, it might not be a specific species, but rather like a whole genera or a whole family or a whole order. And that was another thing. I kept having to go back and, go back to my intro to biology days and be like, do kids prefer chocolate over fancy green salads, to remember the, the domain, kingdom, phylum, all that stuff, to go down the taxonomy order. I was like, okay, it's like going back through your ABC.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so do you have any closing thoughts that you want to share about your project, or how you envision there, how this could help any community, or any lessons learned from your capstone project?
Yeah, thank you. I think the inspiration for this was I'm seeing, and I'm very thankful to see how those larger international and national organizations are coming together and making One Health a priority, and they're starting to implement systems like this, and implement surveillance at the high level. What I found working in local public health, right, really serving local communities, and especially, primarily rural, I can never say that word, rural health jurisdictions. I have found that it's important for surveillance to also be conducted and tailored at those local levels, because that's where you have sort of that specialized understanding of the priorities and the dynamics in your community. And then you can really sort of do the ground level work, right? Alfie says, yeah, he's like, exactly. You can really do the ground level work, and looking at why are we seeing these changes, and, what's going on. And then you have those better touch points with your community volunteers, your citizen scientists, and your stakeholders. So I think it's really important for tools like this to be available at the ground level to, as we're sort of all working together to really implement One Health on a global scale.